Hey, welcome back to the Eagle Insight Podcast, where we have a mission of helping leaders master their craft and live better lives. When I retired from the military about 5 years ago, I was sort of lost. I had been deferring that question, what do you do when you grow up, for about 30 years. I knew three things. I didn't want to be a defense contractor. I wanted to live in Tampa, and I wanted to be involved in the innovation space. And through dumb luck, I found myself at Synap Summit in 2019, which is a gathering of thousands of innovators and innovation enthusiasts. And I knew Tampa was immediately that was the place I needed to be. So how do you plug into a community like that? For me, it was having coffee with one of the people responsible for creating thousands of connections across the city and across the state. And that guy's Brian Kornfeld. He's a serial entrepreneur, a founder, a connector, a poker player, a sports enthusiast, and who's now building yet another venture, this time focused on mental performance for young athletes. Brian, thank you so much for taking time away from building your empire to hang out with me.
Oh, Bob, thank you so much for having me. It's been so much fun getting to know you, spending time with you, whatever we're doing, whether it's a glass of some brown water, bourbon for those people who aren't following, or just talking business and supporting each other. And to tie the story back, I'm not quite sure what day this is going to air, but we're currently recording this on January 24th. It was exactly 6 years ago today, was the second day of the 2019 Synapse Summit. Wow. It was January 23rd and 24th of 2019. So it's my Facebook reminded me of that today and this morning. And I thought the irony behind that, and had to make sure I brought that up today. So, thank you so much for attending that. And thank you for taking the action to get yourself involved in figuring out a way to do it. That's step one.
Yeah, it was amazing, and I can't believe I didn't put that together. That it was exactly 5 years ago. So I was blown away. I'm like, so Tampa is known as kind of this sleepy town, and somebody said, hey, if you want to be in the innovation space, you have to show up to this thing. I took leave. I was still in the Army on active duty. I was in command of an engineer. A district in Arkansas. I flew down here and stayed with a friend who lived a few blocks from Amelie, and I walked in there and was just blown away by how great the event was. I'm like, wow, there must be a huge organization that runs this event. There's thousands of people here. There's all these vendors, there's speakers, great content, and all of the branding that was there. And then come to find out, it was like 4 people and a bunch of volunteers and a whole community. Now, I'm a leadership expert, so I think about how do you lead something like this, and I think, well, some of the most challenging leadership environments to lead in are leading volunteers, leading communities, and leading startups. Those are really difficult places to lead, and here somebody behind the scenes was leading volunteers, leading the community, and leading a startup. And it took me a while to figure out who that was. It was Brian Kornfeld. And so, like I said, I figured out how to have coffee with him. It took me a little while because I was had to fly down here during one of my kids' college visits. And I said, hey, I'm going to take a couple hours off. And I got to meet with Brian. So it was life-changing. And I got to spend a bunch of time with you after that, helping you put on the next summit.
Yeah.
So,
go ahead. Sorry.
Well, I was like talking about those 3 areas of leadership. I'm like, how did you manage to lead through those huge challenges, volunteers, communities, startups?
Rule number 1 of leadership: don't interrupt someone when they're asking questions. Rule 2: have a good sense of humor, especially about yourself. No, those are very, very difficult, and they're 3 very different things. But they all tie into the same at the end of the day. And it's what's in it for the person that you're leading, and making sure people feel empowered and loved and appreciated. What are they looking for? It was always the first question I asked. What was important for them? Was it being out in front? Was it the ability to talk to people? Was it the ability to say I was a part of something? Some people it's money and financially motivating. But finding those motivational factors really helps to matter. And for me as a leader, whether I'm CEO of an organization or I'm coaching a little league team, I'm always trying to find out what it is that what people want that I'm trying to lead. And understanding leadership doesn't always happen from in front. And actually, Bob, it was a good conversation that I had with you at one point. Now, I've had this from other managers or mentors or people who have talked to me about not leading from in front all the time. But I remember we were talking one time as a team, and you talked about how it was like jazz. And when things are going really well with the team, jazz can be very different at different points in time, where it's not one musician who's always in charge and who's in the lead and who's driving the tempo and the flow. It will bounce back and forth when it's time for the different expert to be in charge. And so sometimes it's the piano, sometimes it's the saxophone, sometimes it's the drums, and everybody else will follow along to go with them and bounce the ball around so that way everybody's getting these opportunities. And so being able to see that really does help to make a difference. And even when you're leading volunteers, volunteers have a motivational factor as well. Many of them, they just want to see a community thrive, and being a part of making that community thrive, being able to put their name on something and saying, I helped do this. Um, and to that, it's really simple. It gets really more complicated when people are volunteering for the, I want to do it for this, I want to do this, I want that, I want that, I want that, I want that. So part of it too is understanding who's the right people to have around and who might not be the right people to have around. And it's really important to be able to say no to the wrong people so that way they're not weighing down everybody else. And that was a really hard thing at first because you kind of want everybody underneath the tent, everybody helping and supporting, and as many people as possible. And sometimes less is more to be able to help to support in a big, big way. And that also matters for a startup. When you're leading a startup, now all of a sudden you're trying to get everybody motivated to help to achieve a mission. And that mission is just success. Success has a variable term. It can mean a number of different things. It can mean something very different today, the next week, the next month, the next quarter, the next year. So at first points, it could just be figuring out who your customers are. And that's success. Success could be what's the product delivering to customers. Eventually, success is turning a profit, making it into a sustainable business model. But how are you making sure that you have the right people in the right seats at the right time to build towards that level of success and leading them in a way that's motivating them? Because for some people, again, it might be financially motivated. Some people might be ownership motivated. Some people might just love the mission so much that they want to get involved no matter what. And they're going to figure out what's in it for them is just that, and anything else is bonus. And so all of this together, it really dives into, again, that core factor of understanding the motivational factor pieces.
Yeah, I think motivation is one of the most interesting parts of leadership. Right, we have a sense that we are responsible as leaders to motivate people,
Mm.
and there's people who are intrinsically motivated. They don't need a whole lot of cheerleading from you as a leader, and there's others that are extrinsically motivated. Most professionals are intrinsically motivated. Most people who are in the knowledge sector, for example, are really, they're going to do well wherever they're at, as long as you don't stomp on their motivation.
Mhm.
So they'll bring their extra, right? They'll bring their discretionary effort if you
I would say yes
enable
and
them.
no to that. I think there's a lot of people who will do that, but I think there's also a lot of people in the professional space who are motivated by that certain dollar value that shows up in their bank every other Friday. And that's their purpose of showing up. And if that's the case, then they're going to do just enough to keep their job. And I know that's something that, was a quote made famous from the movie Office Space. It's like, that's just motivation, just enough to make me keep my job. So what is it more for them as well? Because if you're not pulling them up, then they're just going to continually kind of coast around the average marker, and they'll step up when the time is right and do little things when the time is right. But that only will get them so far. And really, you're not looking for people to be right at the average. You're looking to continually raise the average and raise the bar so that way you can continually deliver better results. Otherwise, you have to bring in however many extra people just to do what the job could be of very few.
Yeah, so getting your A players to bring their all, I think those are generally, your A players are intrinsically motivated, and you actually don't have to add a lot to it. Yes, there are some people who are financially motivated exclusively like that. And a lot of those people, oddly enough, go into sales. Uh, but Daniel Pink has a model for what is motivation. He calls it drive or motivation 2.0. And he says there's three things, right? It's people want to be autonomous. They want to own the stuff that they're responsible for and be able to make decisions in it. They want to have mastery. They want to get better at what they're doing. And the third thing is they want to have purpose. They want to know that they're contributing to something greater than themselves and something that's making the world or at least their community a little bit better. Those three things, I would add a fourth things that great performers want to work with other great performers.
Mm-hmm.
Right? There's nothing more annoying to an A player than to have a B player getting paid the same,
Yep.
and getting the same benefits and being treated the same, even though they're contributing a fraction of the value.
Yeah, I would agree with that as spot on. And I see it even when you take the money factor out of this. So I coach Little League Baseball with kids. They're 10 years old. They're 8, 9, and 10 years old at this point. So you're talking kids here. And we had our first team practice last night, and the 4 10-year-olds who had been in this league, this is their fourth season now, and their last season at this age level before they move up to the 11 and 12-year-old age level, taking them aside and saying it's your responsibility to lead and to help and to grow them. Now all of a sudden they're seeing a purpose beyond just wins and losses of a baseball game, getting better at baseball. It's helping the 8-year-olds and the 9-year-olds and helping them understand that if their goal of the season is to win a championship, which there is a championship at this age level, whether there should be or not, they're not going to be able to do it on their own. They can't do it with just the 4 of them. There needs to be 11, 12 people who are on the same page and continually growing, because it's not just 4 people on the field at one time.
Yeah. So exposing them to the idea of making the entire organization better, even if it's for selfish motivations, right? I want a trophy. I'm like, okay, but I have to bring my team with me.
Yeah.
I mean, that's fantastic. It gives them a purpose greater than
exactly
than themselves. Yep. And it also, obviously, when you're coaching, and that mastery piece of the motivation is there. People want to get better. Look, 10-year-olds want to be able to hit it over the fence. They really do. Most of them can't reach the fence, but they really want to.
You can barely reach the outfield at this point. But it's teaching those factors of, all right, how do you stretch yourself? How do you push yourself? How do you get uncomfortable? How do you change what you've been doing, especially if you're one of the 8 or 9-year-olds who has been taught to do something the entire time of, say, how do you swing a baseball bat? But you've also been hitting most of the time off of coaches throwing slowly. And now you're going to have kids winging the ball in at 55 miles an hour, which is a big, big difference. You got to change what you're doing to be able to keep up.
So that's, we love sports metaphors, and you of all people love, I can't remember how many hockey, football, and baseball metaphors we've talked about over the years. But I think this is one that's really appropriate for leadership. When you talk about being a leader coach, when you want to build your team to be motivated, to be excellent at what they do, for them to master their skill set and bring that to you and to the company and to the effort voluntarily, right? The last thing in the world you want to be is a slave driver where you're like, be more motivated, right? The beatings will continue.
That's the way coaches used to be. And even I grew up with a bunch of them, and I'm sure you did as well. And it was very like, no, you're going to do it this way, or you're going to run. You're going to do this, or this is going to happen. And now it's a very different world than it was in, say, the 1980s or the early 1990s. And so we have to be able to build people up and understand emotions are a much bigger factor in the world, even in the workforce as well. Emotions are a much bigger factor. It used to be like, do your job or you're fired. Now, leaders are understanding that the responsibility is on the leadership to help to bring people along, and that everybody's on that same boat together. It's not just the responsibility of do your job or you're fired anymore. And that goes from baseball and sports as a youth to anywhere that you're going to see in a workforce today.
Absolutely. And I think the emotion piece was always there. We just chose to ignore it. When I did research for understanding the psychology of basic training, I started because when I commanded a basic training outfit in the Army, and I didn't understand why my drill sergeants acted the way they did. So I started studying this from a psychology point of view. And I found the the writings of a couple of the leaders from the camps in World War One, and they were talking about the drill sergeants then who were screaming and yelling at people, and how ineffective that was. And they actually used a metaphor. They said if the drill sergeants were teaching baseball, they would send somebody up at the plate, whip a ball by them, and then scream at them for not hitting it. He says you couldn't teach somebody how to hit a baseball in a year, let alone a day. I'm not sure how you're going to teach somebody how to fire a rifle. Now this is early 1900s, and they're saying no, you've got to be a coach and not a screamer. And I think over the years, that screamer stayed in place. It certainly did in the military. Made famous by Arlie Ermy in Full Metal Jacket. And people love to see that but very few people love to experience that on the receiving end. But I see leaders in business who used to be that way, used to be screamers. And as you pointed out, that emotional piece is now more acknowledged, and leaders are starting to back away and go, okay, how do I reach these people?
Yeah, and the if you look at some of people who have always been put up on a pedestal for leadership, I mean, even like a Steve Jobs of the world, Steve Jobs was not known by his inner circles of being the nicest guy. He would just get a lot out of people because he could really envision what a future would look like and he could paint that picture. But he needed people around him to continually pull along the rest of the team. Otherwise, people were quitting on him right and left, and people just wouldn't be able to take it. Just people really, that was ended up being their motivational piece. Or some of the other models, I'm blanking on the name, but they always rated people A, B, and C at the end of the year, and it was like 20% A's and 70% B's and 10% C's, and all C's got fired. So you were always having a turnover of at least 10%. And trying to get away from models like that where people were just fearing of their job and utilizing fear as motivation, that top down just doesn't fly. And especially if you're talking in a small company and you're talking in a startup in particular, everybody has to feel like they are building something that is more important than them. And everybody has to feel like they have ownership of something as you're growing through that small stages of the company. Otherwise, they don't feel that sense of purpose. And when you're working with a small company, the sense of purpose is really not just delivering for you, but it's delivering for everybody around you, because everything you're doing is so high profile that everyone's going to know if you did something wrong anyway. And so being able to hold yourself accountable, not just for you, but for everybody else, and
Yeah.
seeing that level of motivation uh, matters 100 times more than the fear of getting yelled at.
Fear is a great motivator,
Mhm.
right? And
Oh,
people
yeah.
will move to action on fear. They will do whatever it takes to get out of the uncomfortable position that they're in fear. But unfortunately, while that works pretty well in the short term, it's unnecessary wear and tear on an organization over the long term. And so, what I see somebody who's leading by fear, I see a higher turnover rate, but I also see very slow growth, if any, in the organization. And part of the reason for that is because people become risk averse.
Hmm.
Like, I just don't, look, I'm going to do exactly what Brian told me to do and nothing more. Because if I
Yep.
stick my neck out, I'm going to get screamed at. And so now, no, I'm just not going to. So they're not bringing that extra effort. They're not bringing their initiative, their discretionary effort, or their knowledge. They're just not going to bring it.
Well, that's a great way to flatline right there. It is not enabling your team to be able to be at their very best. And
Right.
again, that's the how they're going to do their average. They're going to do just enough to get by, but they're never going to try something new. They're never going to push the envelope. They're never going to try to innovate something. They're never going to give an idea that might be so crazy that it just might work. I mean, I, you and I have gone back and forth plenty of times over things like movies and sports. And so a movie I always love going back to, and I love when I'm flying, if I'm going to watch a movie that has a little bit of thinking in it. Not too much, just because I have to zone out, or sometimes I'm doing work on the plane, but a little bit of thinking. So Argo is one I go to a lot. Thinking, history, thought process. And I remember when they go to the Canadian ambassador's house, when Ben Affleck's character goes, the first time, and he's trying to pitch his idea of how he's going to get the Americans out of Iran, and they think he's crazy. And so the Americans all go in a room and talk. They say, this might just be so crazy that it might work. And somebody had to peek their head up and say that against everybody else. And to be able to continue to grow a company, you have to have some of those crazy ideas, and you can't be afraid of those crazy ideas. You can't, and they need to be rewarded. And especially in a startup type environment or in a volunteer type environment where people want to feel like they are being appreciated and loved. If they come up with a crazy idea and they get shut down even one time right away, they are never going to do it again. And all of a sudden now you've lost them forever. So there's ways to continually say, like, that's a great idea. Let's talk about this. It might not work for right now, but let's definitely talk about a way we can implement this in the future. So this way, if it isn't something for right now, you still are building them up, but every now and then throw one in, because a lot of times, what do you have to lose? It's you don't really have as much to lose as people think.
Yeah, I think the ability of leaders to assess risk and to take prudent risks is probably one of the most underappreciated leadership traits of successful people.
Oh, 100%. And understanding risk has to be there time to time. You cannot live your life completely risk averse. Otherwise, just live yourself in a bubble. And,
Yeah.
startup world is definitely not for you. I would honestly go and say corporate world is not for you, because you are risking your life every day in the corporate world, that somebody could turn around one day and say your job is no longer necessary, and you have zero control of that. Zero. You
Yeah.
could be the best at what you do and somebody could still say that. Your manager might disagree, or somebody might disagree and say, oh my God, that's the worst, I can't believe it. And then the next day they're going to show up anyway, and you're going to be home and dealing with the pain. So trying to figure out what those right risks are. Now, I'm not saying throw all caution to the wind and start everybody, quit your jobs and start companies here on your own. But when I first started my first company, I did it as a side hustle, and then I grew it to a point where I was hired as a CEO. And I was hired into that so I could lead a company, in a small company that was a funded startup. And then it got to the point where the next company was, all right, we have the funding behind this, we have the customers, we have the product ready. Now let's go on that. So it's still taking those risks without just throwing all caution to the wind.
Yeah, and I think there's an interesting thing in your background about how you assess risk, right? And that's your poker playing,
Mhm.
because you've been a very successful poker player in the past. I'm glad I've never sat down at a table. I played poker for the first time in years about a week ago with a group of of investors, potential investors for my startup. And I wasn't sure if I was supposed to win or lose, but I did lose. So hopefully they think kindly of me. But I thought about you and how you play poker because of the way your brain works and the way you assess risk.
Mhm.
There's a great book out there that it talks about thinking in bets in terms of business leaders. What are the probabilities of successes, and how you approach the challenges that are in front of you and the choices that you have. So
Yeah, and I mean the poker player mentality. There's a lot behind it. Game theory is always a really interesting thing to study for a lot of people. I watch. One of the things about me that a lot of people don't know. I love watching Jeopardy. I set it to record. I watch it when I'm on the treadmill at the gym. It's something to pass the time by. It's the trivia, but I also love watching the way that people bet when they're playing Jeopardy, whether it's their daily doubles or in Final Jeopardy. And I have a friend that I talk to a lot about this, about how wrong so many people bet. But the person who actually optimized it and who did very well was a guy named James Holzhauer, who is the second biggest Jeopardy winner of all time. And his background was sports betting. He was a professional sports bettor in Las Vegas before he went on. So the poker player mentality a lot of times is, how do you optimize your wins and minimize your losses? And how do you think about that in terms of numbers? Now, in business, it's always a little bit different because there's a lot of gut feel when it comes to it. But how can I take some small risks and continually win small or lose small? And then when I finally find that opportunity, when the numbers are big in my favor, that's when you push it in a big way. And a lot of people miss that, and they end up gambling versus utilizing what's in their favor. And a lot of opportunities are missed. They see those opportunities missed. And so if you can continually win small, say you win small 2 out of 3 times, that's still +1 every time. So if you're winning small, say you're betting $5 and you win $5, you lose $5, you win $5, and you can do that consistently. You're winning $5 consistently over that time frame. You do that long enough, you're up, say you do that 6 times in a row, you're up $30. Now all of a sudden, if you risk $15 for a chance to win 50, it's a much easier risk to take on because A, you're already in the black, you're already ahead of the game, and B, you're seeing how the odds can swing in your favor in a big way. And so that's the way that a lot of people who are smart are looking at this, is they're taking these small bets. They're not trying to hit a ball out of the park. Going back to the baseball metaphor, if you're swinging for the fences, you're going all the way for the fences, you're more likely to swing and miss than you are to hit a home run. However, if you can hit a bunch of singles until you get that perfect fat pitch right down the middle and then you take your big swing, that's when all of a sudden things really can go very well for you. And it's being opportunistic, especially in the startup world. It is one of the key traits to success.
So it's interesting that you bring up that gut feel, because I think poker players have a gut feel about whether something is right or wrong, but they develop that gut feel over
It takes
time with
time.
experience, and behind all of that, it's data.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes we don't even realize how well we have accumulated data and experience that inform the gut feel. So we can't quite put our finger on why we think this is the right decision. We just know it is.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, all of that is really important. The data, the experiences, things that you do. And that could be a number of different things. That could be a place you traveled to and you took something new. That could be a conversation with somebody as a new data point. All of this, and thinking about the world in that way versus just thinking about coasting by time. So, what are you learning from different people? So, even conversations I've had with you, things that I've taken away from those conversations, I can use as data points. I used in a in this interview a random movie quote from Argo for that's a weird data point for anybody to ever pull out in anything whatsoever. But it really is a data point. It's not just reading a book or learning. I think that's a part of it. I think if you look over my shoulder there, that black book right there is a book called Super System, which was one of the original poker books written by Doyle Brunson, the godfather of poker, who just passed away a couple of years ago. And it's those are data points, those are learning points, but without actually putting them into action, they mean absolutely nothing. And it's only a very small subset of the data points that I would ever use because I'm continuously learning time and time again. And that's actually when people go to the poker mentality, why the internet poker players did so well at first, because instead of sitting at a single table, playing for hours on end, they could be playing thousands of hands a day, playing multiple tables at one time on multiple monitors, and they're getting so many more data points all at one time to optimize their game theory. And then all of a sudden they could continually build and grow on that and get even more data points. So always learning, always, always,
Yeah, so
always.
that's such an important point about not just leadership, but about performance at any level, is the ability to continuously learn.
Mm-hmm.
Like when I decided to become a leadership coach when I was listening to a podcast about leadership, and this guy talked about his. This is a great leader. This podcast guy is just fantastic, and he's like, yeah, I was talking to my high performance coach the other day. I'm like, you have a coach? Here's a guy that's got it all put together. He's got a coach. He's like, yeah, I know. I'm in my late 60s, but I'm not done getting better yet. I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, okay. I'm not quite in my 60s, but maybe I should not be done getting better yet. Maybe I should have a coach. So I did. I got a coach, and then I became one. And I still have a coach because I think that's important. I think it's one of the competitive advantages, particularly in the 21st century, is the ability to learn and grow and adapt faster than your competition.
Mm-hmm.
So,
And yeah,
yeah,
and that's AI coming into play here. I mean, look at what that's able to do. And if people can cut out some work that is not as meaningful or not as important, that AI can maybe take advantage of them, and they can spend that extra time instead and use it to learn and adapt further into what they're doing, they're going to continue to level themselves up. I mean, it's a great tool right there.
Absolutely. And to me, leaders should obviously be focused on those things that only that they can do.
Mhm.
And if they're spending a lot of time, a lot of leaders came from being an individual contributor, and they were probably the best individual contributor at their thing. Uh, that's why they got the leadership job. But they don't know how to make that transition into getting things done by other people. And so it's a huge challenge for them to unlearn that piece of things, right? To that being the best individual contributor is what leads to success. So for me, I'm like, look, every leader should be focused on what can you delegate, automate, or outsource.
Hmm.
Anything that you don't personally have to do that's not in your superpower, get somebody else to do it.
Yeah. Oh, and I mean, the idea of delegation is so hard. A lot of people go through and they become the expert at what they do. That's spot on. What happens then though is they get in this mentality of it's either done my way or the wrong way. And when you start to delegate, there's a whole other factor of trust that has to come in, that you might get different results than if you were to do it yourself. So they might not be as good as if you did it yourself. They honestly might be a little bit better. You never know. Or if they're not as good, then it's your job to lead on how do you help to make it better and better and better and set the next person up for success. And so I had somebody who used to use 4 words for me, 4 words when he was leading a team. You'd say communicate, enable, trust, and verify. And that's how he would delegate, is he would make sure everything was communicated very well, very easily, make sure they have all the tools that are needed to be able to achieve success, trust them that they're going to get it done, give the space, don't sit over somebody's shoulder, don't say no, you have to do it my way, and then verify. Now verify again, trusting that it's getting done and it's going to get the job done, and it's going to hit a good enough marker. It's not always going to be exactly to your level, but understanding what that definition of good enough is for the project. And if it is, say, you would do something at 100%, and the person you've asked to do something does it at 80%. Now 80% for this is good enough, then to be able to go back and have that conversation after about, all right, this is good for now, next time here's the difference between 80 and 100%. And also if you do a little bit more and it's 120%, that might be even better for next time.
Right.
So,
So it's funny that you use those exact numbers. One of the productivity coaches that I know, a guy named Dan Martell, says 80% done by somebody else is 100% awesome.
yeah.
And because
Oh yeah.
that's stuff that you don't have to do. And so now you can focus on those leadership issues, those strategic issues of leading the organization instead of being in the business. Now you can go work on the business.
And unless you like having zero work-life balance, and I know zero people that really like having zero work-life balance. Some people will say they like, being in their work all the time, but they're really doing it because they feel like they have to. They don't want to. They would rather be with their family. They'd rather be on vacation. They'd rather be at the beach. They'd rather be on a boat. They'd rather be skiing. They'd rather be, who knows? They'd rather be shopping. There's a number of different cliche things somebody could be doing rather than working. That's how you actually get there. It
Right.
is by enabling others to help you achieve your goal. That took me a long time to learn, because I used to feel like I had to be an omni knower. I had to know everything going on to be able for a company to be successful. And I had to have my fingerprints on everything. Otherwise, people were going to be judging me that I wasn't doing enough. And
Yeah.
it took me a long time to get over
So I've got a draft of a book that I'm writing called "Be More Lazy,"
that.
because as a leader, if you want to see your organization thrive and it's not based on just your talent, like if you have a guru business where it's just you, fine, you don't have to be more lazy. You get out there and hustle. But if you're trying to build an organization, as the leader, if you're a busy doer instead of enabling and resourcing people, uh, you don't have a growing business. What you have is a job,
Yeah.
and you're never gonna work back from that. And I think you said something earlier that I think is really important to this part of the conversation about how do you successfully delegate. Is you said you got to have the right people in the right seats, and it's very difficult to let go of things, particularly if you built it,
Hmm.
but it's almost impossible if you don't trust the people you're handing it to.
100%. And also understanding your strengths and weaknesses and knowing it's okay to bring in people who complement your weaknesses. You don't want to surround yourself with every 100% of people who are exactly like you. Yeah, you want them to be culturally good fits and to get along very well. But if you bring on everybody who has your exact same skill set, it's never going to get any better. And that was a hard lesson for me to learn at first when I started my first company. I had somebody take me out and I wrote out an org chart, and he said, like, hey, write it out, like, CEO, CMO, CTO, COO, CFO, CRO, whatever, whatever you want to call it. So great. Put your initials in which boxes are yours. And I put my initials in every single box. And he said, do you see a problem here? And I said, no. So, this is my company. He goes, are you as good at marketing as you are at technology? No. Are you as good at sales as you are at finance? No. Now do you see the problem? Yes. So it's about finding who can actually complement and bring new, fresh ideas as well. So this way, even if you are delegating and they're not doing it exactly your way, the fresh ideas may be that difference maker of what gets you from where you are in point A to where you're trying to go at point B.
Yeah, absolutely. Dan Sullivan talks about who, not how, and there's wisdom in when you're procrastinating about something. It's like for me, it's bookkeeping. I hate bookkeeping. I've got a business. I'm the only person in it, and well, I was the only person, but I hated doing the bookkeeping, so my books would always be a mess. And then at the end of the year, the tax guy would go, "Oh my gosh, we got to unscrew this entire mess that you've created." And the procrastination piece was because I didn't like doing it and I wasn't good at it. And I probably wasn't good at it because I didn't like doing it. I would much rather go focus on coaching. Okay, so instead of figuring out how to be a better bookkeeper, I just need to figure out who could be a better bookkeeper for me.
Yeah.
I also figured out that I don't run my schedule or my email very well. So now there is a lovely lady named Elizabeth, who is my executive assistant, that does that for me. And I have become probably 50% more productive since started working with Elizabeth. And by the way, she is a military spouse because I go through a service that provides executive assistants virtually, exclusively from military spouse population. They have a hard time keeping a job with their spouses moving around, their service member moving around all the time. So it's a great service. If anybody in the listening audience is interested in that, I'd be happy to make an introduction.
Well, I was going to vouch for that because I was actually going to use that as, we're talking about random data points earlier. The emails just of building up to this conversation between a pre-survey. Now, granted, I don't know if we really needed to do that because you and I have known each other for 6 years.
Yeah.
But the emails, the reminders, the links, sometimes all of that gets really lost. And I was going to compliment how good that was. So it really was very efficient, very well done. I actually had thought it was just a pure automation service you had put in place. And that was going to say, all right, 72 hours in advance, this goes out. 48 hours in advance, 24 hours, 10 minutes in advance, this goes out. So it's definitely vouch for that and how well it's received by people who are receiving it.
Well, good. Thank you. I will absolutely pass that along. And I can tell you that when as a leader, buying back your time, that's a Dan Martell tag, is just buy back your time of getting the stuff off of your plate that doesn't necessarily have to be you as the leader.
Mm-hmm.
Focus on those things that are your superpower. You're not the best marketer, Brian. You're the tech guy. So hire somebody better at marketing than you. And by the way, you're pretty good at marketing, but there's somebody better than you at marketing. So let them do it.
I'm
And
pretty bad at marketing, but that's okay.
well, I still remember when somehow you convinced Sarah Blakely to come speak at Synapse Summit. And Sarah said, the minute you can afford to, hire away your weaknesses.
Mm-hmm.
And that stuck with me. I'm like, you know what? I've got weaknesses, and we have to get over our ego for a second to admit that we have weaknesses. Because I'm good at a lot of things, I'm just not great at all of them. And I want a great marketer. I want a great bookkeeper. I want people who are great at those things.
It's an interesting point that you bring up of getting past ego and talking about all this, because to me, when I observe so many startups, and I'm kind of shifting gears a little bit, staying on the subject of ego, and I observe and I coach a lot of startups and a lot of entrepreneurs, the biggest thing that holds startups back is ego. and they don't realize that the scoreboard for startups is not measured based on their ego and based on how many news articles they're in. And I was very guilty of this at first. And Andy Hafer, a guy who's also a mentor of mine and who you know very well and who probably won't listen to this, but you never know. If I tell him I give him a shout out that he will. He told me at first, when I first was working with him with Synapse, that I was going to care far more about my name in the paper than I was about anything else. And he was right. But I got over that really, really quickly. And it matters a lot more about getting the team the recognition. But the scoreboard that's going to matter at the end of the day, oftentimes for companies, because it's a business and not a lifestyle, is what's in the bank account. And your name in the newspaper does not add a dollar to the bank account. So that's something, when you're in a startup, check your ego at the door, because that is the last thing that matters anymore.
That is some fantastic advice. I would say that applies not just to startup leaders, but leaders at every level, that
Agreed.
your
But
ego is what's going to get you in trouble. It's what's going to hold your organization back. Now, it's interesting because, you kind of transitioned there that, a lot of startups do fail. And a lot of it has to do, not all of it, but most of it has to do with the founder, their ego. But there's some other factors that are there, like, running out of cash, not having a great business model. And I say Wes Lehman, who was on the podcast a couple of weeks ago, would tell you product market fit is probably something that's going to crush you as a small startup. But you got to see hundreds of startups through Synapse. And now you've got a startup that's growing. What did you learn helping other startups that you're applying now to your own venture?
product market fit. No,
Okay,
that was going to be one of mine.
it's huge, right?
Yeah. One of the things that I saw a lot of startups fail at is they build something because they think it's cool. What they're not doing is figuring out what problem they're trying to solve and spending the time. And really, it's rushed into a product build versus saying, what are the pain points that I'm trying to solve? It's the one thing that I'm going to do better than anybody else. Because if you can solve a pain point, you're going to get customers. And that is something that people far too often fail at, is figuring out who their customers are, who's going to pay for it. Again, going to this is cool, I'm going to get investors and people are going to give me millions of dollars. Well, then what? Because even if you come up with a genius idea and somehow you get an angel investor, you get on Shark Tank and they're like, yeah, here's $10 million, and you just burn through that cash without figuring out who your customers are, then what? And so you're not buying yourself time to get customers at that point. It really is important to try to figure out who those customers are. And that's where product market fit comes into play. With the new company, MaxU, that I'm running, my business partner and I, we spent probably the first 6 months of the project working on the customer base and figuring out who the customers were and who was going to pay for it and how much were they going to pay and how are we going to be able to build this and grow this, versus thinking about what is it exactly that we need to build. Because if we knew what the customers were, then we knew we could build at least to what they were looking for at first, and then utilize their feedback with the money that they were paying us to be able to build and grow, versus giving away based on an equity investment. So that's number one. I think we touched on equity and ego and the leadership. I think we touched enough or a little bit on team, but not getting the help that you need. There's so many resources in the community, and so many people have watched too many movies or read too many stories about ideas getting stolen and not realizing that you need to get the help that you need. Now, if you are too afraid of your idea getting stolen, somebody else is going to think of your idea somewhere and how you're doing it somewhere anyway. And a large company can run away with it. So you have to figure out what it is that's your secret sauce in there. That is why you could do this better than anybody else in the world. Thinking about Facebook and watching The Social Network, for an example, the reason that they were able to be successful was the exclusivity factor. Even if the idea was stolen, Mark Zuckerberg was able to do it better than anyone else in the world because of his programming skills and his knowledge of being able to extrude the loops of just their core community and being able to get out to people who he hadn't seen before and get this in front of people that hadn't been seen before. So it wasn't just going around one fraternity or one dorm. it spread through Harvard like a wildfire, and then through other university campuses until it was able to grow the way that it was. Um, so being able to do that, ask for help, going to a place, I mean, what is it, 1871 in Chicago. Um, I was very inspired by my visit there. And when I went, because I just watched the
Explain real quick what that is.
Oh yeah, good call. 1871 is a giant startup business hub in downtown Chicago. So it is a place for collaboration. It's a place where companies like investors and large scale corporations and universities have offices and talent offices. It's a place where a whole bunch of startups have co-working space, and there's a lot of collaboration and open working room. So it's not just people who are working in their offices tied away from the world. It's people who are writing on whiteboards right next to somebody else who might be writing on a whiteboard for a different company. And all of a sudden, if you're looking over and you're saying, oh, they're working on this, let me give them this idea. I'm working on this, let me ask this person for help. Now those collaboration pieces, you're getting help from a million different places and all these different data points to help you build something that is big and that can continue to grow and scale. And so to be able to see it and to be able to ask for that help and to be able to be ingrained in the people that are helping, far too many people are saying, oh no, I'm too afraid of talking to anybody. I need everybody to sign an NDA. Everyone's
Uh,
going to take my idea and run.
yeah, how many investors have been chased off by a young founder who's like, you have to sign an NDA before I'll tell you what I'm doing?
Oh my God. That's a tale as old as time. And the investors are just going to say, all right, fine, go away. Like, we don't need you. You need us more than we need you. And so understanding that factor. The last piece is the resilience factor. And 100% of startups that fail, 100% are because the founder gave up at some point or another, or somebody who was running the company at that point gave up at some point or another and said, this isn't for me anymore. It could be because they ran out of money and they couldn't figure out how to get more money. It could be because they ran into a roadblock with a customer. It could be because certain members of the team didn't work out for them anymore. It could be for any myriad of reasons, but they basically said, fine, this just isn't for me anymore. It could be because their spouse or their significant other or their family said, hey, you got to go get a real job and make real money. Um, but that's 100% have reached that point where they cry uncle. And that resilience factor, that gut check factor when things are up against you, is the most important piece as a startup, because none of it is a straight line. It is ups, it is downs, it is hard, it is lonely, it is painful, and it is exhilarating and fun all at the same time. And so to be able to deal with that range of emotions and to wake up the next day and say, no matter what happened yesterday, no matter how bad it was, we're still going to be successful today or move in the right direction today. It is the difference between hearing about Apple, which started as two guys in a garage, or not hearing about the hundreds of thousands of companies that you have never heard about that potentially could have been Apple until somebody gave up.
Yeah, that's such an important point. And you mentioned Andy Hafer before, and I still remember having a conversation with him about a startup that I was trying to help him and that he was invested in. And he's like, it's going to be like a roller coaster, but roller coasters are kind of fun. And at the end of it, when you end up on top, you just can't wait to do it again.
Yeah.
And I thought,
Mhm.
what a great summary of the entrepreneur journey, particularly when you're starting a small business. Now, there's a life cycle for these businesses, right? There are it goes from the ideation phase where you're like, you and a couple of guys, drinking bourbon and scratch something out on the back of a napkin, to all of these different stages where you're now a successful company that's in a growth stage or a fully mature stage and they're looking at an exit. Uh, the founders typically will ride through all of those stages, but most of them don't have the experience to realize when they're transitioning into different stages.
No, and oftentimes, and a lot of times when I talk to founders, some people want to be founders when it's a little too soon for them to actually be a founder. And I guess that's the definition of what's a founder. Is it, one of the first people? When is it the first 10 people? What's the difference between founder and entrepreneur? But a lot of times what I would coach someone for the life cycle of an entrepreneur is get a job out of college, work, whether it's in corporate America or 100-person company, and learn from there and really start to build and grow yourself. And then do that for a couple of years and then meet somebody there who's starting a company and be employee number 5, be employee number 8. And all of a sudden now you're starting to see things from the inner circle even further, and you've seen it from the bottom tier. Now you're seeing it from the inner circle, and you're seeing how the decision processes are being made. And especially if you have a good leader, they're coaching you along the way. There's someone on my team now, and he's struggling with another teammate. And I talk with him about, here's a little bit behind the curtain. Here's why I'm making these decisions. Here's why I'm saying, let's do this. And I'm not just saying like, here's what we're going to do. And this way he can understand. And so he can also grow and learn a little bit more as he's going. Because if he ever wants to do this on his own in the future, I want him to be fully ready and understand that different people are going to make decisions for different reasons. And it's not just a one size fits all or one way to do things. Um, and then I suggest to people, start a company, find your idea, but don't start it just because you want to start a company. Find a problem to solve. It's a lot easier to sell business to business than it is business to consumer. And if you're in a business and you see a problem within the business and a solvable problem, that is the key to be able to build and grow.
Without a doubt. So, Brian, something so important there that you just mentioned is kind of the mentorship role. And I had an experience when I was a captain. I was nominated to be an aide to a general, 2-star general in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. So he ran the Army War College. And before I left my previous assignment, my brigade commander, so he's a colonel, probably 20 years older than me, sat me down and said, "Listen, you're going to go be an aide de camp." I said, "Oh, great. That sounds like fun." Not really. Um, he says, "It's the most incredible learning opportunity, and you're going to give up a bunch of your time to make sure that this general is successful in his day to day things. In return, he owes you mentorship. Insist on it. When he makes decisions you do not understand, ask him why he made those decisions." Now, some generals will not share that with you, but most of them will with their aides in, you don't ask them in public, right? You ask them in between things
Right.
when you're driving somewhere. Like, I don't think I understood why you made the decision that you did. And you start to get insights into how senior leaders think. The advantage, I think, in today's youth going into that model that you talked about, go get a job in corporate America, go get a job with a startup, go get a job somewhere else, that if you are willing to ask that question, hey, the advantage there, you have proximity to the CEO. Like if you go work for Ford Motor Company, I mean, they've got so many people, the chances of you meeting the CEO are very, very slim. But if you're working in a 20-person company, you probably do know the CEO. And when you don't understand something, again, don't call them out in public. But if you could walk up to them and say, "You know what? I was thinking you were going to go the other way on that decision. Can you walk me through that so I understand why that was a great decision?" And that'll help formulate your brain about thinking strategically for that kind of business at that level.
And not only that, but it's also going to stroke the CEO's ego a little bit. And CEOs all do have ego. No, seriously. And I mean, we do, like, we still like some levels of recognition, and ego may mean something different to different people. But and a lot depends on how you ask. Like, why'd you do it that way? Is very different than hey, I wasn't expecting you to make that decision. Can you please walk me through that? Because I really loved it and I wanted to see how you got there. Like, all of a sudden now you've asked the same question two different ways. And one way you're going to get met with a defensive response, and the other way you're going to get met with probably a 20-minute monologue. So be prepared for that 20-minute monologue of what it meant and why, and diving in deep, and things that you may never think about or behind the curtain, or you're just angles you're not currently seeing that the CEO is seeing. And maybe the CEO is far off base and you completely disagree with their decision, but at least now you're understanding where it's coming from, why it's coming, and it's a new data point for you to learn. So that way, for your future decision making, you could potentially do something of that nature, or you might learn what not to do. You
That's so
absolutely
important.
dislike and say, now I know why I'm not going to do this.
Yes, that is incredibly important. And I still remember watching colonels make decisions when I was a staff officer, and I'd look at them and go, "Why did they make that decision?" And if you got them alone and you ask them, they're like, "Well, because screw that guy, right? Because those guys are our competitors, and we have to stomp on them every chance we get." And like, "Oh, really? They're wearing the same uniform as us. You know, they're
Right.
actually on the same team with us. It's just that oh, your career progression is tied to whether or not you're outperforming that peer, and you're willing to sacrifice the greater mission for your career. Okay, I just learned something about you, and I learned something about me, because now
Mhm.
I've got to watch. I've got to guard against that desire for my own promotion at the expense of the mission.
Yeah, and I mean that's not just a military thing. I had my eyes open just going out and spent some time with the top 60 high school baseball players in the country. They had some an opportunity to go and play in a baseball game against each other in Arizona, and there was a whole mentorship session for them and their parents. And one of the coaches, who was actually a college coach, came in and was talking about minor league baseball. And in minor league baseball, you're not just playing a game where you're competing against the other team; you're competing against your own players.
Right.
Because when it comes time, say you're at the double A level, that someone gets hurt and they need a new outfielder for the AAA team to move somebody up, who they're moving up is dependent on who's doing the best just on that double A team. So now all of a sudden that inroad of competing from within, but it depends on how people are thinking too. And so if that's everybody's thought process is competing from within, the entire team's going to implode. So how do you balance this? How do you go by this? How do you run it that way? So the whole, not everybody is in it for the right reasons, but if you can find that balance for leadership, that's when you find gold.
Absolutely. And I think as a leader of teams, recognizing those star players that have great individual statistics but are not great team players, that
Mm-hmm.
are hurting your team, even if they are your highest earner, they're still
Mm-hmm.
holding your organization back. That goes to the culture piece of how do you create this winning culture, high performing culture that includes everybody,
Yep.
not just your singular big hitters.
Yep. Absolutely. And culture is going to matter just as much as anything.
I always think of I think it was the 2004 Boston Red Sox that cut Manny Ramirez and traded him off, even though he was their best hitter, because
Mm-hmm.
he was so disruptive. And the
Yep.
team could not perform at the level they needed to because they had a great performer who was all about himself.
Yep. It happens all the time, all the time across sport and all the time across business. If you are watching a team and you see someone who's in it just for themselves, it causes teams to implode very, very rapidly.
It does. And those organizations and leaders that reward individual contribution at the expense of your culture are going to inherit an incredible mess. I think if you want a great example of that, you will look at who were the most highly rewarded people in Enron right before it fell. It were the people who were willing to step on the backs of their teammates in order to be successful. They were dishonest and they were rewarded for it because they got great returns on the investments. But those were not people that you want to work with, and that did not do the company any good in the long run.
No, and we've all worked with people like that, people who will stab you in the back, people who will talk trash, people who will be bashing other people who are griping all the time, people who are negative. And it's then you kind of see what they do when something goes well, if that's when all of a sudden they peek their head up. But the real true test of somebody's merit is what are you doing when something's not going so well? And how are you reacting to that? And are you stepping up or are you hiding? Are you blaming? Are you pointing fingers? Or are you taking ownership? Are you being vocal? Are you leading? And are you taking blame where it's needed? And then when it does go well, defer the credit. And that's truly a leader.
Without a doubt, I couldn't have said it better. So I've got a formula from our conversation here, particularly for founders. If you are thinking about starting a company, you probably ought to check in with Brian Kornfeld and see if you can't get a few minutes on his calendar to pick his brain about your idea. But first, you better solve a problem. That's got to be first and foremost. Second, you need to check your ego. Third, Get the help you need. In some cases, that means putting the right people in the right seats. Sometimes it means partnering with the right people. And then fourth, be resilient. Like you're going to be successful if you just don't give up. Now, that doesn't mean that you keep throwing good money after bad. You may have to go back to number one and see if you've got product market fit. Are you actually solving a problem? But don't give up.
Yep. That's yeah. And thank you for clarifying that, because it doesn't just mean, again, like throw all caution to the wind, but it might be reassess your bets and what are you doing, and
Right.
then find that way to take the next step forward, that and the appropriate next step forward versus just, diving headfirst continuously.
Yeah, I think there's a big difference between being resilient and being just plain stubborn.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. Don't live the definition of insanity, doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results.
Awesome. Brian, I can't thank you enough for being here today, man. This is a lot of fun. And I think we do owe a trip to one of those places that I think we had Pappy Van Winkle flight at the last time we got together. So I would be happy to meet up with you again and repeat that if possible.
Oh,
So
you're not going to have to twist my arm too hard. And, thank you very much. And, have loved seeing this career progression for you and how things are going, and having this conversation, especially after 6 years, and having a weird career progression myself from defense contracting and corporate America to startups to now the new company, MaxU, which if anybody ever wants to look about mental performance for youth sports, www.maxu.co. Come check it out. It's an awesome product. So AI backed, using today's best technology and working with some of the best athletes in the world.
I tell you, it's got Brian Kornfeld's name on it, so it's got my interest. And I know I don't have any youth players anymore because all my kids are off in college. But by the time my grandchildren are ready to start youth sports, I know your product's going to be very mature and crushing it. So I can't wait for that moment.
Yeah, me
Uh,
too.
Thank you again, and I will see you at the bar.
Thanks, Bob.